I mean, that, as Michael said, is life. It's the noises outside that we'd kind of like to keep outside, but sometimes they come inside. I've been involved in a lot of change efforts over a long time, a lot of systems transformation things over a long time. And this spring did something a little bit different. I've had the idea for quite a few years, but finally with a couple of really good friends, we pulled it off. It was a very simple thing, was to bring together 8 different groups or sites from around the world, all but one of whom I knew really well, who were living embodiments of, as best I could say and others could say, what might emerge. So I'm just going to tell you a few stories, because obviously what I said just now is very abstract, and to give you a little feeling for it. In 1985 or so, I think it was about 85, I met a man from Uganda, a man named Mwalimu Musheshe. And he and a colleague were starting a program which eventually be called the Uganda Rural Development and Training, URDT. They're working in the poorest region of what was a chaotic country at that time. Why they wanted to work in the poorest region was really unclear. There were 1 or 2 people who were trying to raise money to support their efforts. They said, why do you start in the poorest and the most backward part of the country? And they said, just seems like the right place to start. But what really struck me about Musheshe was, I'll never forget first conversation I had with him, and he said, the biggest limit on development in Africa is fatalism. And I always remember that. There was such a clarity to that. He said, when people do not believe they can alter their future, when they do not believe they have efficacy in their life, doesn't matter what you do to help them, it will just reinforce that belief. That's why all efforts, no matter how enlightened, at any sort of assistance, ultimately have within them the seeds of their own limitation. Over the next 3 or 4 years, every year we'd have a group of 3 or 4 young Ugandans who'd come for about 2 months of training. We'd had a 3-day leadership course. Actually, we still have a version of this course that I do regularly. Many of you here know the one I mean. It used to be called Leadership and Mastery long ago. In fact, a lot of the ideas that found their way into the 5th discipline, that was really the incubator for those ideas, started around 1978 or 79. They'd come and they'd do that program. They do a lot of work in personal mastery. They do a lot of work in systems thinking. They'd come for about 2 months, then they'd go back. And of course, we didn't see them when they went back. They were always wonderful young people. I mean, we always felt, there was a group of us leading that program, and we always felt we were really, really fortunate if it just so happened that we were there when the Ugandans were on their visit. And I remember after about a year or 2, when a new group would come, say each year it'd be about 3 people, typically mid to late 20s. They were field workers. They were off working in the villages in this region of Uganda, and doing things like helping people dig better wells, establish better granaries, better composting toilets, the basic things. But then they'd also bring us photographs. And I'll never forget the first one I saw of someone who'd written his vision on his hut. And you could get a feeling that something was happening out of this clarity that they had, that what really mattered was shifting this underlying mindset. And then obviously doing things that would reinforce a shift of that mindset. It's, you know, you don't shift mindset in the abstract. A little bit like Michael was saying, it's in the day-to-day. It's in the moment by moment. It's in the doing. All learning is in the doing. To make a long story short, today this is the most prosperous region of Uganda. It's led to all sorts of remarkable economic development. A lot of the things you'd expect to see in these kind of settings, the microcredit and all the small enterprise, a lot of emphasis on organic agriculture. In fact, Musheshe was recently asked by the President of Uganda to be a special advisor in their agriculture policy because they've been so successful at building a rural economy around organic agriculture. It's probably one of these success stories in Africa. 25 years later, a remarkable resurgence. About 12 or 13 years ago, as a lot of the basics were starting to kind of unfold, and you could really see that something was really happening, they shifted and began to focus very specifically in one area. They decided that what was most important for their aspirations was the education of girls. How many of you have ever seen the movie, the video of The Girl Effect? Okay, that's not nearly enough hands. So can you remember this? The Girl Effect. Google it. I won't tell you any more. It's probably the most systems insight per minute I've yet seen anybody achieve. It's 2 minutes and 25 seconds long. When it first came out about 2 years ago, it was one of the 5 most watched YouTube videos in the world for a good while. It's remarkable. Well, these people, without ever having seen this little video, were living it. They first started, of course, in a poor country, and most people have to pay for their children's education in countries like Uganda. When there's not enough money to pay for all your kids' education, you pay for the boys' education. That's a fairly common pattern in poor countries. So they decided, well, the first thing they needed to do was they needed to start opening girls' secondary schools. Because typically this will happen around the age of 10 or 11 or 12. So they started opening girls' secondary schools. 3 years ago, they opened the first rural women's university in Africa.
Yes.
And they came up with this brilliant model. They call it the 2-level education model. You educate the girls, and the girls educate their parents. Because, of course, a lot of their parents don't read or don't have a lot of the basic skills they need to be effective. So the girls just call themselves transformers. That's what they call themselves. I didn't want to do any audio-visual stuff, but you can kind of imagine, because we have videos from all these different sites. This was one of the 8 sites we brought together. That there's nothing more powerful. Certainly my words are very, very weak at evoking what you'll feel in 2 or 3 minutes of listening to one of these young girls talk. So I just tell you that story as an illustration. In the last 2 or 3 months, it's become very apparent to me that miracles are happening all around us.